This master box set was a little bit of a pain to assemble, and it irks me to no end that they put the sprue connecting to the top of the heads right into the hairline instead of at the base of the neck, but it is what it is. I kept the male Native Americans separate from the rest and primed them both with the reddish brown before hitting them with the zenithal spray of dark yellow, followed by a second lesser zenithal spray of a tan on the upper shoulders and top of the head. Then, from below, I apply a little bit of an orange ink as a general shadow, followed by a few darker shadows made with the brown ink into the deepest recesses such as in between his legs, the armpits, and under the chin. I complete the airbrush work with the final spray of magenta from below, targeting under the hands and face to add some warmth. Thus far, I kept everything within a family of earthy tones, and I keep this idea going by selecting a few of Army Painter Speedpaints that are also earthy. Now, this video's intention isn't really about being a tutorial or even here's what I did and where I failed. Instead, this video is going to show how I watched a few painting videos and decided to combine lessons from each of them into one. The videos in question are from Marco Frisoni's Not Just Mecha channel, which if you're not subscribed to already, you need to stop watching this and go there. The specific videos are linked in the description. Long story short, what I combined was his suggested practicing of a limited palette, specifically the Zorn palette, along with how we used contrast paints mixed with medium and water as more of a watercolor-like stain. Now, I do not have the contrast paints, and I went down the Army Painter Speedpaint path instead, but I figured it'd probably work the same way. And picking speed paint colors that are sorta in the realm of the Zorn palette, specifically a bluish black, a red, a yellow ochre, and white. The related speed paints I grabbed were Occultist Cloak, Blood Red, Ochre Clay, and Battleship Gray, which was the closest thing that I had to white. I had prepared on my wet palette pure puddles of each of these colors, and then additional puddles that were created by mixing these tones in as many combinations as possible, such as green hues from the yellow and Battleship Gray or Occultist Cloak, and then dark and reddish browns from the ochre, red, and black. I then cut in some water to thin them and then a little medium to make the mixes a little more stable, and I applied these over the miniatures. I didn't really put that much effort into how I applied it, beyond lighter tones where light would be and darker tones where the shadows would go. These went on easily and tinted whatever they touched, but most importantly, I wasn't afraid to overlap colors and tones. All of this seemed daunting at first, but the only real trial was taking a few minutes to mix the different tones on the palette. The application was fast, easy, and honestly extremely satisfying. After the stress of trying to churn out the 7 miniatures and the tank painted earlier this month, and both of them taking twice as long as I thought they would, this was a nice relaxing process. At least it was until this step. The relaxing process quickly became a trial of patience as I decided to use this project to practice yet another thing I normally don't use for miniature painting, specifically heavy body acrylics. These I rarely use because of the trouble I'm about to experience, but there's nothing to learn how to use something other than getting in there and, well, using it. To start, I pull colors that still fall into the Zorn palette, or at least as best as I currently own, and mix these to create my tones. This was easy due to the thick nature of the paints. I also added some medium onto the palette and got to work adding different amounts of water and medium to the paints as I went along in an effort to figure out how to control this stuff. Because I knew I was going to have a lot of problems, I started with the eyes, especially since ivory black was pretty transparent and would require multiple applications. Despite trying a lot of new things during this project, I also decided to try my hand at a more complicated eye, dotting in a color for the iris, then a black smaller dot for the pupil, and finally a very tiny dot of white for a light reflection. I normally don't paint eyes like this using the paints that I can control, so this would be the ultimate test using these heavy body acrylics. Somehow I managed this with little fuss, which assuredly was luck and not any semblance of skill. I can say that with full confidence because I had a lot of trouble getting the paint to a mixture to where I could easily paint hatching lines to create rough textured highlights and shadows on the clothing. I kept having lines that were too thin and transparent and weren't even noticeable. That or the paint was too runny or it'd be too thick entirely. After a lot of trial and error, I started to find better results by barely dipping the tip of the brush into pure paint, and then barely dipping the tip of the brush into water for just a moment. This would thin the paint enough so I could get good, clean dots or noticeable lines, while keeping the paint thick enough that it would create real subtle textures on the miniature itself. I would just have to make sure to do this very regularly. I decided to add a little cerulean blue to the palette to add some colored designs onto the bits of clothing and saddle blankets, and base these colors and the patterns, at least the best I could with the paints I'm still not able to control, on some images of the Muskogee natives that once inhabited the area I live in. I finish off the use of acrylics with some stippling on the base to vary the tones before I swap to oil paints, again staying relatively close to the Zorn palette. I then mix some Georgia clayish red for an oil wash and drop this all over the base. With oil variants of the same tones from the Zorn palette, I create highlights for the flesh of the horse and the natives. These I dab on as pure oil paint with no dilution before coming back with a soft, short brush to smudge and blend them to smooth out the skin. And then again in choice areas to add even brighter highlights. This application was easy and fast, and the only trouble I had was the fact that the brush I used to apply the oil can no longer hold a point. They all need to be replaced. I went through a lot of brushes quickly, and my guess is it's because I used a very strong mineral spirit for cleaning them versus an actual artist grade variant. I've recently swapped, so hopefully it will help preserve future brushes. I finish off the base by adding some PVA glue mixed with water and sprinkling on some flocking for a late dry autumn appearance, much like outside by my barn. Lastly, I pry the male off of his temporary base and attach him onto the main one, before I black out the rim and I get to call this a night. This is where I stopped. I really like how the faces came out. I still can't believe how I got some decent eyes with the heavy body acrylics. The flesh came out nice and smooth, and somehow I managed to have everything easily distinguishable between the different miniatures assembled here, despite the limited color palette that I used. For lessons learned, composition definitely matters, and is definitely my biggest gripe with this end result. I typically do not do dioramas, and the one I have done in the past was some rocks and 4 women evenly spaced around a tree, so that was simple enough. But here, with both natives on one side, along with the head of the horse, this seems grossly unbalanced. In a perfect world, to balance it, I'd want a base at least 3 times this size, and then maybe add a small tree, something like a dead cedar, thin but a little taller than the natives. Then maybe I'd have a painted backdrop of a tree line of pines, pecans, and mimosas on the other side of a creek. Damn it. Kinda want to do that now. Additional lessons were that I can't use heavy body acrylics to save my life. That doesn't mean I need to give up on them, just means I need to use them more often. However, I don't think I'll be using them for everything, but rather for niche value. They thin easily, and I think I can get some really good glazes out of them. Also, due to their very thick nature, they're good for creating real texture on miniatures, such as for rough clothing or something like heavy embroidery or stitching. Marco's use of thin contrast with medium to be used similarly as watercolors translated well to speed paints, and they were incredibly simple and relaxing to use this way, especially over airbrush shadows and highlights. This is something I'll be doing again for sure. This is my first real attempt at a limited Zorn palette, and let me tell you, I really enjoyed it. I ended up using 13 colors for brushwork, but this was only due to 4 speed paints, 5 acrylic paints, and 4 oil paints. Ultimately, they were almost all the same color across 3 different mediums. This helped greatly reduce the amount of palette space I usually eat up, and after using like 50 colors on the Collect Core box set I painted a few weeks ago, this was a nice change. I think I'll be doing a lot more stuff with a limited palette like this. The biggest boon from practicing with the limited palette was it made me mix paints and tones instead of relying solely on a pre-bottled color. Using a limited palette really took out a lot of unnecessary thought on what color should this be or what color should that be, and it really simplified my approach, with the most important element being trying to preserve lights and shadow. Again, visit those Marco Frisoni videos and learn directly from him. He's a huge boon to the painting community and is far more knowledgeable than I. I have started picking up art books to study painting theory and techniques because of his content. Maybe he'll inspire you the way he has me. And that'll bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or inspired to start or expand your own collection of homages made to those that once dwelled the land you currently call home. Or in my case, the Muskogee tribe. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you could easily support the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.